items. If any member of committee wishes to discuss a consent item and/or questions upon it, please identify so now, and we will move that item to the top of the staff reports. If not, we will need a mover and a seconder to the recommendations within the 4 staff reports. What do you want to do? Mayor Luke.
Well, I certainly read through all 4, and I'm prepared to approve.
Approve
These
all
items,
4
yes.
consent items? That's a motion.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's what you want.
Councillor Black, seconder. Discussion?
Question on one of them before I can, if that's okay.
Well, if you do, we'll move it to the top of the staff reports. Okay, well, which one is it? Okay, we'll ask for approval of the other 3.
A, B, and D. Thank you.
Councillor Columbus?
Mr. Chair, that's a forest management plan. A lot of work went into that. Impressive document, but I do have some questions about it, so I would like it withdrawn from the consent items. Actually, I think all these items, I don't like this consent business.
So that leaves 2 we're going to deal with on a consent basis? Okay, which leaves reconstruction in Delhi. That's okay. And reconstruction in Simcoe on 2nd and Wellington. That's okay. All right. So we'll move the other 2 into staff report territory. All right. All those in favor? That is carried. All right. Lo and behold, next item is staff reports. So we will deal with consent item PW 18-12, extension of risk management official and inspector consulting services. Someone want to present this, or you were just going to discuss it?
Sorry, did you, I wasn't sure if you wanted me to answer a question or if you wanted a whole presentation.
Let's have a presentation. It's now a staff report to me.
Okay. The report before you is for the extension of the risk management official and the inspector for the consultant services. We have this report before you. It's a requirement of the province that we have this position. We have to undertake this as part of our regulatory compliance under the Long Point Region Source Management Plan, etc. It's on an on-call basis, so that when the material is required, we actually engage the consultant at that point. There's sufficient funds in the budget for this, and we're recommending that it simply be extended to include the following year. We have all of the money. If work is not done, we don't actually pay any money out of our pocket. It's like a contractual obligation, so that when we need somebody, we have somebody already available to do the work.
Okay, questions? Councillor Brunton.
Yeah, I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, through you to Lee, and sorry my back's to you there, but I think you brought, I remember we brought this report forward last year, and I guess, can you tell me what happened over the last year and how much it might have cost us? Am I correct on that or no?
Through the chairman, you are, Councillor Brunton, you are correct. It is something that we brought forward before for the award of it in its original state. This is for the extension to go forward with it. We spent, I believe, in the neighborhood of approximately $40,000 since the contract has started.
Oh, so it's substantially less than what's in the report, am I right then?
It's substantially less than the budgeted amount, again, because it's sort of it's a fee for service when we
Right.
need the service. We haven't had the need yet, so we haven't been spending any money.
And do you see that growing to be I use the word growing, to be a lot more down the line? Or are we
Through the chairman to council, it depends on the development community and where that development is located, et cetera, based on the need. So it's a very hard thing for us to predict because we're reliant on a third party coming forward with development applications from the county for us to be undertaking these sorts of things. So it's very difficult for us to predict how much we're going to spend in a year. But again, we're not paying anything if the service isn't being used.
So it's like a retainer of some sort, right?
It's like a retainer for free. I'm not sure the best way to explain it. We don't pay them to be on call, but when we do,
Right.
we have set fees that we pay them for when they do the work.
Thank you.
Okay. I have Councillor Geisens.
Thank you. What are these people going to actually do?
Mike, please.
Thank you. Through you, Lee. What are these people going to do if we actually need them? But I can't seem to find out why we need them, I guess. I'm sorry.
Through the chairman to council, they are required under the Long Point Region Source Protection Plan. It's required by the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change. They review everything to assess risks, potential damage, potential problems with our source water protection, et cetera. That's the whole point of their role, is to simply review all of the information that's coming in so they can provide a recommendation on going forward as part of source water protection.
Mike.
Forgetting to do that. Anyway, we got it now, that the Long Point Region Source Protection. Was that mean that could be Port Rowan or Long Point, or what are we talking about here? All the wellheads? All the wellheads in Norfolk County?
That is correct. We are required under provincial legislation to identify all of the wellhead protection areas and all the wellhead protection areas. So we have all of these different areas, and every time there's development applications within the bands and the circles and all that sort of stuff, they require different levels of studies and stuff to allow it to go forward. And we have to have somebody, we're required to have somebody available to do that. We don't, clearly as indicated last year, it's not a full-time job, and we don't have the technical expertise to hire somebody. Many other municipalities have opted to do this same thing and engage an outside source to act on our behalf on an as-needed basis.
How long will this go on? For 1 year, 10 years, or whatever?
Through the chairman to council, until the legislation is changed. So I don't know when the various forms of government choose to change it, but at right now, there is no end in sight. This isn't a short-term matter.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, the report is on page 25. The recommendation is there. What's your wishes? Councillor Black? So moved. Seconder? Brunton? All those in favor? That is carried. All right. Takes us to staff report CS 18-06, Forest Management Plan and Forest Operations Plan. Over to the right.
So through the chairman to council, the report before you is in regards to the forest management plan that forestry undertook in 2017. The need for the plan was identified by forestry staff tasked with managing county woodlots. The biggest need was essentially the need for a transparent system for managing the woodlots. We're starting to deal with a lot more pressures on the woodlot in terms of recreational use, timber extraction, and also the environmental protection aspect. Prior to the development of the plan, staff really didn't have an overarching document to kind of guide management on these lands. So that was kind of the need for the plan. Forestry staff undertook a lot of the legwork in terms of the data collection and collecting past management documents for the properties. The 2017 budget did have a $37,500 line item for the development of the plan. And the end of 2016, Arbex Forest Resource Consultants was retained for the assistance of the development of the plan. The plan, because forestry staff did undertake a lot of the legwork, it did come in under budget at about $16,000 for both the forest management plan and the operations plan. Ultimately, the plan does provide, detailed instructions in terms of the silvicultural work, the timber extraction, gives detailed guidelines in that regards, but also kind of strikes a balance between what the county should be doing for environmental protection and recreational development as well in these woodlots. The plan at the end does contain a list of recommendations that the county should consider undertaking in regards to management of the forest properties. A lot of these recommendations are practices that are already kind of in use, just not formalized. So ultimately, this report is just requesting council to accept the plan as written and proceed with implementing the recommendations.
Thank you, Adam. Questions? Mr. Columbus?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Adam, this report's been, we've been waiting for it for a long time, and I must say, these documents are heavy, and I didn't read them really thoroughly, but I think you know where every tree is pretty well in the county, on county land. Just one of the things that struck me is the fact that our income in your report, one that you've written, page 12 of the 18 pages, the executive summary, it mentions we've got 35 properties in this program, and it was works out to $1,694,461 income over a 24-year period on these 35 properties. But our income on an annual basis is basically only $70,600 over the past 24 years. So I'm just wondering, is there any way that we can gain more income? Like $70,600 doesn't seem like that great an amount of money per year on average.
Through the chairman to council, so one of the main components of the forest management plan was looking at how to sustainably harvest our woodlots. So a lot of stress was, or an emphasis was placed on, not focusing on the dollar figure, but ultimately to sustainably harvest a woodlot, you can't be harvesting more wood than what the woodlot can produce. So through the forest management plan, we do identify targets, and those targets pertain to acreage and volume of wood fiber that we can be harvesting. So again, the targets and our harvesting schedule moving forward is really based on those targets, and it's really difficult to kind of place a dollar target, keeping in mind that we are limited to what we're working with. As stands become eligible for harvest, we go in and we do what's going to be best for the woodlot silviculturally. So a lot of that, is improvement work, harvesting the poorer trees and improving the stock for future harvest. So the past harvest kind of give you a little bit of a guideline, and our operations for the past 20 years have followed that practice of doing the silviculture improvement, and that happens to be the dollar figure that's working out fairly consistently over the last 20 years or so. We're sitting right around that 65. So I'd say that's a pretty accurate target, and it'd be difficult to kind of adjust that.
If there's very little value coming from some of these 35 properties, is there any thought that maybe some of them can be sold off? And if there's no revenue return on them, because we do have a tree cutting bylaw that restricts tree cutting, and they've got to be a certain size and that type of thing. So has any thought ever been given to that?
Through the chair to council, I guess any liquidation of county lands, I guess, would have to be a directive of council. But the management plan also recognizes a lot of environmental, recreational benefits that come from these woodlots as well. So timber harvesting and the revenues from timber harvesting is kind of, it's a plus for managing these woodlands. A lot of these woodlands that we aren't harvesting, they're provincially significant wetlands. So even in private ownership, they don't necessarily pull in tax dollars. And through the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program, a lot of the taxes that you'd see from having these in private ownership isn't really that significant. But mainly, it's weighing in those environmental protection benefits as well.
Understand. Thanks.
Councillor Height?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Forestry. I emailed you about the revenue, as Councillor Columbus touched on, too. Were you able to get those by year?
Through the chair to council, I do have some numbers in the executive summary on page, I think it was 13. Lists kind of the revenues for the past 20 years, or 10 years, sorry. broken down to 5-year intervals. I do have more detailed information going back further. If you'd like to see that, I could provide that in a memo to council.
Well, the revenue in here, it was shown by tract as opposed to per year.
In the executive summary, so that's separate from the operations plan, forest management plan. It's the one that I prepared, just the paper copy there. On page 13, it does break it down by year and tract, so that may be of useful information.
Which one are you looking at? Oh, yeah, but I'd have to add them all up. That's not what I'm looking for, Adam. Right? But, okay, fair enough. While you were doing this plan, was there any consideration of selling off the smaller lots? I see there's a bunch of little tiny lots here that probably, they cost you more to look after than they would just to dump them.
Through the chair to council, that wasn't something that was explored in, within the scope of this management plan, so I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. And then on your recommendations, number 5, it says here, moving forward, all tree marking will be conducted by certified tree markers, because that's not the case currently, is it?
Through the chair, currently, tree marking, prescription development, a lot of that is done in-house. So in-house, myself and one other forestry staff are certified tree markers. So the majority of tree marking is done by certified tree markers.
So you do that, okay, great. And number 8 was the invasive species action plan, that it should be prepared. Does that mean we've never had anything on the go to deal with invasives?
Through the chair to council, informally, as operations come up, we do go in and do some preliminary spraying, vine cutting. We do works. Nothing formally has been developed. So this plan kind of provides the bones for us to develop some of these more formal policies moving forward.
So you're recommending that the plan be prepared. Do you have a timeline on when you were thinking about doing that?
Through the chair, as part of the package, you'll see a supplemental documentation document. A lot of that does outline the invasive species that we do encounter in our woodlots and the control recommendations for those. So it's pretty simple to put that together now moving forward.
Okay, and then I see number 11 was the wildfire management plan. I know in my area we had a lot of fire roads, and they have completely grown over at this point. Do you plan to open them when you come with that plan, or?
Through the chair, we will be undertaking a very overarching fire management plan. Primarily, our goal through that plan would be to identify potential targets or values located in and around our woodlots, and develop a strategic plan for protecting those values primarily. One thing we will look at is the fire roads and maintenance on them, but ultimately a fire plan can be as detailed or not detailed as you want. Given the fact that we haven't occurred any forest fires in our county woodlots, in recent history, and with the hardwood succession in these pine plantations, that risk does go down quite a bit. So we will be looking at kind of a really high level forest management plan, focusing on values in and around the woodlots.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Brunton?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Adam. Adam, in your report, I guess you and Bill submitted, I see on page 30, it says, as such, there are no additional financial implications at this time. But I guess when I see this page 13 in the executive summary, there's been a lot of revenue there. Well, I guess up until the end of 16, what, $716,000? Like, where'd that money go? Does that just come in as a general revenue? Is that how that works? Or is it like?
Through the chair to council, yeah, that just basically comes in as general revenue to the county.
So you don't, and I guess my question is, is there any reserve fund for you to, I know every year we nitpick at the ash tree removal and everything, but do you not have any reserve fund that you're derived from those revenues?
Through the chair to council, no. We do, in forestry, we do have a reserve fund pertaining specifically to the bylaw, where we're collecting fines or fees from applicants looking to clear forest cover, and that's to go towards reforestation. But as in regards to the revenues from county woodlots, no, that just goes to general revenues.
Well, so I'm clear here. We got 958 hectares of land, right? 35 properties, I think that's in the report, page 6. Is that what I'm reading? 958 hectares of land that you manage, or we manage, I guess?
Through the chair, yeah, in that 958 acres, there are lands managed by Public Works. Some of that is the water treatment facility, Norview Lodge. We've extracted those areas, so we're looking at about 178 hectares of forested land, that's correct.
Sorry, hit me with that again. The report says 958 hectares of land. Is that forested land, or is that other? Clarify that for me.
Through the chair, the next sentence there does say approximately of that 878 hectares are forested. There are other vacant lands and lands being used for other purposes within that 958 hectares.
Okay, I understand now. But I guess I'm starting to wonder why, for your purposes, why some of this more, or a little more of the revenue isn't, besides fines, why some of that revenue isn't really set up in a reserve fund for you to manage this program. We seem to have reserves for everything else that are unfortunately in a deficit position, but I still like to actually, you've made some money here, and I don't know why you don't get to spend some of it on your program. Anyways, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mayor Luke.
Not an important question, but I'm curious. Adam, we also provide services to Haldeman County, correct? Forestry and trees?
Through the mayor, or through the chair, we don't anymore. This will be our first year since
Without.
2001 without, correct.
Okay, no, okay, well, that's good. That's an answer, thank you.
All right. Anyone else? All right, the recommendation is before you on page 29. Mover, Mayor Luke. Councillor Black is seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Oh, I'm sorry. Discussion after the motion. Go ahead. Councillor Brunton?
Yeah, again, I'm going to hit on this. When I look at the revenues on page 13 in the executive summary, 700 and something thousand over from 2007 to 2016. You know, and it's something we struggle with every year, you know, with the ash tree problem. I think there should be a percentage at least of this revenue that goes to a reserve fund that he can operate under or with. I think it's only fair, and I'm going to leave that to the staff to come back with something that, you know, to finance the program, I guess, if I may use that word. Is that out of line to ask for that?
Through you, Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Johnston?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Brunton. It's definitely not out of line. In the reserve report that we brought last July, we identified a lot of reserves that needed work. We identified a lot of reserves that needed to be replenished. And also, one of the things in that report, we also identified an ongoing study of our reserve and reserve funds to see if we need new ones, to see if we need to discontinue ones that haven't been used in a while, and so on and so forth. So I've made a note on this specific revenue item to definitely look at that next time we bring that style report to council. And but just so council realizes, any revenues that we do decide to put towards a reserve rather than the levy, it will have a tax impact to the residents.
Well, I realize that, but I think it's fair. I mean, these things are important to us. I think to all of us, to the environment, whatever. And to me, I don't know, maybe if you could come back with some form of report that gives us a percentage of the revenue into a forest reserve fund or whatever that might be appropriate. So do I need a motion to that effect?
Probably we just give them direction.
That's fine with me. I'd just like to see it happen. That's
All those in favor of a direction coming back from, or a report coming back from staff on this?
On a reserve, establishment of a reserve. I can make a motion if you want.
Okay, just a minute. We have the other motion to deal with first.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right.
Mr. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The direction from council will be part of an overall reserve report that we are planning to bring back to council on an annual basis. So when that report comes to council, we will definitely have a section in that report that deals with the forestry revenue.
Thank
You okay with that?
I'm okay. If
All
the
right.
rest of council is, yeah.
Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and when will that report be coming this year?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Height. That is the third of 3 reserve reports we plan on doing in 2018. The first being the financing policy from the reserves for capital projects. The second being the reserve bylaw with changes that we've made since the last bylaw was passed, and then a third report dealing with suggestions for reserves going forward. So we can, with the reserve bylaw report that is coming, we're planning on that one in about May or June this year. So I'll make sure that this particular topic is included in that report.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Mr. Chair, what I'd like to see is I'd like to see a report come back from staff on, I guess, the value of some of these small area lands with the potential of selling them. Is there really a point to hold a 2.9 hectare piece of forest and maintain it? I don't see it. Would I need to make an amendment for that, just to have the report come back with some of the valuations, maybe potential revenue streams off of these small little acreage properties, or?
Mr. Johnson, would that amendment fit in with your scope? No? Let's deal with the main motion and you can make another one.
Okay.
All right? We're still dealing with the main motion in the report, which is on page 29. Did I have a mover and a seconder? Luke and Black. All right. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, Councillor Height, you have something else.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move a motion that we have a staff report come back with a valuation of property value for our lots 10 hectares and less, with the revenues, the potential revenues of them. At least let's see what we're going to get from these little properties. And if not,
Okay, you've
So-
heard the motion. How about a seconder? Councillor Brunton, discussion? Got the gist of the motion?
Through the chair, it's been moved by Councillor Height and seconded by Councillor Brunton that a staff report be presented to council with evaluation of property values for lots of 10 hectares or less with the potential revenues.
Okay. Speaking to the motion.
Mr. Chair,
Councillor Wells.
just a question. I understand the intent of the motion. Will we need to hire somebody to appraise these woodlots and in terms of what their value and so on and so forth?
Mr. Biddle, can you answer that? Or
I guess I'll jump in. Through the chair to Councillor Wells. Yes, in talking to Adam here, there would have to be some outside help to evolve or to get an evaluation of each property.
Thank you. Councillor Black?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't think this motion or information has been reviewed at all by staff, and I wonder what their input is.
Through the chair to council, I guess there'd be quite a few different things to look at when we're looking at the value of the properties. First, we'd have to determine, obviously, a land value, but we'd also have to look at potential uses for that property, because whether they can build on the property, develop the property, there's going to be a lot of things that play into the potential value. So certainly we'd be able to explore that if council wishes, but it would be an additional cost.
And, would that take away from your existing work?
Through the chair, I think it's to Councillor Black, a little early to tell. I mean, we would have to first look at our mapping, get an idea how many properties were actually under the 10 hectares. It could also impact other parts of community service as far as trail connections and things as such. So I think we would have to start with looking at what properties we had in the 10 hectare thing, and then we'd know how big a project we are, how much work we had to bring this forward to council.
Do you see a value in performing this task?
Through the chair to Councillor Black. I think I'll hold comment on that. I mean, I know what Councillor Hyde is after. If these properties are less than 10 hectares, and as far as a revenue source with wood products and logging, yes, they may not be a great revenue maker. However, there's the environmental impacts as well as the recreational trails and things like that. So again, until we actually looked at the map, saw where they were located, and the size, how many we have, it's very tough to answer at this time.
This is such a good idea. Why didn't staff bring it forward to council in the first place?
No comment?
I think through the chair, I laugh at that, but I don't think in the past there's ever been a push from councillor staff to diverse of county woodlands. Actually, we were picking one up hopefully this year in the west end of the county, as council knows. They do serve an important, as urban areas expand, a lot of people look at these for trails and recreation and things like that. So there's never been I don't think, a directive from council to look at selling these woodlands.
Okay, thanks very much. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Councillor Hyde.
Through you, Mr. Chair, question to staff. So Norfolk County has never sold a woodlot off in the last 10 years?
Through the chair to Councillor Hyde, that I can't answer. I just know I've never in my time.
No, because I'm pretty sure they did. I live by one. All right, thank you for that. It's not uncommon to sell something, Mr. Chair, at Norfolk County, a piece of woodlot. I don't know that we require additional staff. I'm looking for a general valuation. We know farmland is, what, $10,000 per acre? So there would be X amount of the bush, land, forests, or trees, marketable trees in the bush for sale. A valuation. Honestly, you talk about saving money. If we have 2-3 acre lots around the county and we're sending people out to look at them in the forest or cleaning up blowdown, as mentioned in some of these reports, they're not worth hanging on to. But that's my opinion.
Yeah. Any further discussion? Okay, you've heard the motion. I'll ask the deputy clerk to read it again.
Through the chair, the motion is that a staff report be presented to council on property values for Norfolk County lots of 10 hectares or less with potential revenues.
Who moved it and seconded it?
Through the chair, it was moved by Councillor Height and seconded by Councillor Brunton.
Okay. Councillor Wells.
We approve this. Are we going to have to hire staff to do this so that we get a report back? That's my question. Is it going to be done by our own staff, or are we going to look at hiring staff?
Through the chair to Councillor Wells, staff's best recommendation is yes, there would have to be some outside help. Obviously, Councillor Height is right. Our staff could, once we pin down the 10 acres, or the 10 hectares, how many we have, we could look at the wood value. We should have a pretty decent idea on that. However, it becomes the idea of residential lots, developments, trail connectivity, that sort of thing, and that's the thing I think we're going to need a little bit of outside help on to arrive at a fair and market number.
You heard it, outside help. Councillor Brunton.
Well, and I appreciate what Councillor Wells has said, but I'm starting to think that even if we took the first two comments you made, Mr. Cridland, just to get an idea how many they are and where they are, and the harvesting benefits, we don't need to come up with a value. It maybe the whole idea might fall by the wayside, but you said our staff could do that much. And maybe that's as far as we need to go for now, before we even consider getting rid of any of them or selling them off. I'd just like to know how many there are, where they are, and is there any timber in there worth anything? Like if it's two acres or 2 hectares, it doesn't make a lot of sense in a way. But so if our staff can do the first of it, and Councillor Height's willing to drop the appraisal, if I could use that word, maybe it's worth a start just to look at them.
Through the chair to Councillor Brenton, no, I think if the motion would obviously have to be changed, but in answer to your question, yes, staff could come up with maps and approximately wood value or timber value on these lands.
Do you want to modify your motion a little bit there, Councillor Height?
Sure, could you read it again, please?
Sure. Through the chair, that a staff report be presented to council on property values for Norfolk County lots of 10 hectares or less with potential revenues.
So where did I say appraisals in that?
Well,
I missed that word. It's not in there.
Well, no, but
So I'm not calling for an appraiser. I'm looking for a rough land appraisal, and do we not have a property management coordinator here that could give us an estimate? I'm sure we do.
County manager would like to speak.
The reasonable course of action, given, to answer your immediate question, Councillor, if you demand a report with prices and costing, our professionalism requires us to follow through on that and deliver you a proper work product. Backing off that statement, a slightly modified motion that had, estimated values with proposed uses, words like that, would allow us to provide you a report that assesses the various potential, I have no idea how many woodlots we're talking about, and I don't think my colleagues do either. But we could come back, you have a fundamental philosophical question you actually have to address before you get anywhere near whether it's worthwhile or appropriate to sell woodlots that are held in the public trust or to log them more aggressively than we currently do through our current woodlot management practices. We'd be very happy to bring you a report that has some estimated values, and you're correct, we do have people on staff who can provide a reasonable estimate of the value of a woodlot and where we don't have to go and expend additional dollars. So we'll use our existing staff resources to come with some sort of vague estimates, some argument, some analysis around ecological and recreational needs. We can't pretend there's only money involved. And the council can make an informed decision at that time as to whether or not you want to provide us with some budget dollars to go out and be very specific or not. It will or won't be worth your while to go forward. You can make an informed decision then. We can, you are correct, we can do some report using our existing resources, but the way that currently reads now, I would hope and expect that my colleagues would want to go and get professional numbers that would come back to you based on how that reads. I'd expect nothing less than the best.
Okay, so my motion needs to read estimated values?
By our staff. Okay. Councillor Columbus, speaking to this.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that motion refers to future income. Okay, so if a forest, if one of these parcels less than 10 hectares was harvested last year or the year before, you may not go in there and harvest anything for 15 years. So then that would not show up in the equation, right? It would show that there's no income going to happen within 5 or 10 years. So I almost think we need something in there to show what the income's been, at least for the last 5 years, in the past 5 years, in addition to potential future income.
Can we just let the motion stand that we do an estimated value by our staff? And after that, we'll get into specifics and real value. Mayor Luke.
Mr. Chair, I just want to briefly say, I sort of want to support the motion and I sort of don't want to. 10 hectares is 25, well, it's just under 25 acres. I'm struggling a little bit that we've spent money to do a 5-year operation plans on our woodlots, and we've spent money on a 20-year management of our woodlots. You know, we got an acre, a couple acres here, or a couple hectares there. I certainly can see why do we have them? Why not sell them off? Because there's not really that much to be gained, and let somebody else look after them. But I'm struggling a little bit that we want to start looking at up to 25 acres of woodlot that we now have a plan in place to manage, that we now all of a sudden we want to get rid of those or consider it. So, you know, I have some mixed feelings here. I certainly can see some of the small parcels, yeah, I think it's worth looking into, but I don't know if I want to support suddenly now selling the larger end. I would think they're a valuable resource for the county to have and look after and harvest. Thank you.
All right. Councillor Black.
Speaking against the motion, we set policy and then don't follow it. I don't see any need for selling off any of our woodlots or properties. I've always thought that they were purchased for more than just economic recovery. I mean, that's part of it, but for ecological, environmental considerations, recreational needs, you know, we're a proud county to own so much property and have so much forest cover, something like, I don't know what it is now, 25% overall, 30% down in the Walsingham, Houghton area. And Mr. Cridlin brings up a valid point that, and I went out, there was a donation from an individual of a piece of property. So, you know, on one hand, we're selling property, on the other hand, we're going to receive donations of property. I don't know, that doesn't seem to make sense to me. And I felt that it was a worthy thing to look at and follow through with this donated property. So I don't know where we're headed with this, and it just seems to be like no direction at all. You know, with a corporation that's something like $200 million, I think you need to set overall policy rather than just nitpicking away at little things. You know, it needs to be done in overall, all-encompassing corporate policy.
Anyone else? Councillor Brunton.
Very quickly, and Mayor Luke hit it on the head. I work in acres still, but 10 hectares is 25 acres, you said?
That's
Right, roughly? Maybe that's getting a little bit too big. I don't know, Councillor Height, maybe, I certainly support the smaller acreages, that we have to look at it. What we do with them, I don't know. You know, maybe we could reduce the size, and if there's 1 or 2 acres sitting out there, let's just look at it. That's all we're asking. That's all I'm looking for. Thank you.
Councillor Height, would you like to change the size of the properties we're talking about?
Well, could we ask staff how many there would be? Because we just did a forest management plan, and I know that our forestry guy knows that number right off by heart. Okay, because we just spent, how many, 16,000 on this plan?
So
Mr.
through the chair to council, offhand, there would be approximately 1 or 2 properties that would fall below 10 hectares. There would be one in Simcoe here, off Donley Drive, and there's one off the Forestry Farm Road right now.
We just wasted $600 on all of this. Sell them.
Okay, I'm going to call the question. We've already read it 3 times. Just a minute. Councillor Brunton. Okay, Councillor Brunton is removing his name from the motion. Do we have another seconder? We do not. This is dead. Okay. All right, this brings up a real interesting one here. Our first staff report, FS 18-02, 2018 levy operating budget, final budget adjustments, page 33. Who's got this? Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair to Mr. Mayor and members of council, on January 25th, during the budget deliberations, there was a motion that was passed to remove $400,000 from 2 major line items in the budget, one of them being materials and supplies and the other one being services. So staff have come back with the suggested removal items. 374,000 of those removal items did fall within those parameters. However, while we were trying to find items to remove, we didn't quite follow the resolution to the letter. However, in the spirit of the resolution, we did find 24,000 in another line item that's outside that scope. So I wanted to bring council to that, bring that to council's attention. And if there's any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Mayor Luke.
Well, I think I know the answer to this, but through to Mr. Johnson, I have had some concerns raised by individuals. I'm on page 39, where it talks about the other suggestions of closing those 4 small community centers, Walsh, Victoria, Port, Dover, and Waterford. I certainly don't believe we're cutting those in this 400,000. I see no evidence, but I'm having people tell me that's what we're considering. Comment through the chair?
Through the chair to Mayor Luke. Those items were part of the discussions that
Yes.
SLT had. However, they are not part of the final list of 400,000.
And that's what I do, and I will respond to those individuals, but I wanted to make absolutely sure. I see the list, Mr. Chair, on page yeah, no, Mr. Chair, I was looking on page 35 of the report, which is somewhat of a summary, I guess, but the other concern brought to my attention, other than someone thinking we were going to close their hall, was the feline control program of $40,000. That, as everyone in this room knows, has had a long history of, I don't want to say off again and on again, but that sort of type of background. And that certainly is one of the list items that staff have brought forward for our consideration. And Mr. Chair, my final comment on this would be there is merit at the end of budget sessions to say we need this much money to be happy to conclude this budget session. Turn it over to staff. They know best what they can live with and without. However, with that, you always run the risk of something like the feline control, which had a lot of public input, just got somewhat off the ground last year, and now, I don't want to be in a position to say, well, that was not council's decision, that was staff's recommendation. Well, that's what it is, staff's recommendation. It's up to this council to make the hard decisions here. That's what we get elected to do, and subsequently take any follow-up heat that may come from it. So I just wanted to be clear on that we have asked our staff to do something for us, find some savings. They have. This is one of, this along with Everbrook Downey Museum is one that it's sort of an outside group that is providing the service, not that Everbrook isn't in-house now, of course. We're just asking for the delay. And that's clever thinking in my opinion, but it's, those are my comments on this. Other than that, I think staff's done a magnificent job here in finding 0.5% off our tax levy. Not an easy job.
Thank you. Councillor Black.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't support this motion, and I would have supported the concept of sending it back and letting staff come forward with where they thought they could cut $400,000, but this was a motion that was directed to one specific area, and it's indiscriminate in its design. And here now we see in front of us what sort of services it would affect. So am I correct? And the ones that are being recommended are the ones on page 35 or page 3 of 4 of the report. Is that the list? To staff, to James?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councilor Black. Yes, that is the list.
Okay.
And if you look at the very first attachment on page 37, that is a bit more of a detail of that list. Some of those items are comprised of 25 line items just for the one amount.
Just for one of them? Yeah,
so there's
okay.
a good cross-section there of cuts to many line items for materials and supplies to some major cuts made to like the winter control area.
Okay. So, and I don't know if procedurally this is a problem when we've at budget passed the feline control program at 40,000 and now it's back to us. Does that not require a motion of reconsideration through you to our CA?
Well, I'd say, and with full respect, although you've passed a budget, because council elected to send with an indeterminate, a $400,000 item without specificity and asking us to find the matters. You hadn't specifically passed a budget, so in theory, we had to take the money from somewhere. You passed $209 million and change worth of items and asked us to take 400,000 of them out. So what you passed was 209 million something less 400,000. And regardless of where we took it from, in theory, we've changed what you said specifically. By definition, you have to do that. That's a discrete item that obviously catches the eye, but in theory, we've changed, as Mr. Johnson said, there were more than 25 line items in one of those cuts. So we've changed 3-4 dozen items that you've considered, and then we revised downward, or we proposed to you that you revise downwards. This is the best we could come up with. It bears repeating or emphasizing, at the bottom of page 33, you see that it's actually a 1% decrease in services. And within these amounts, which staff were not allowed to speak to at budget, I might add, includes all of the election expenses. That happens once every 4 years, and it's actually beyond the purview of council to cut, since you have to have the election and the clerk has some autonomy with how, in this case, he runs it. So that 1% cut includes a whole bunch of one-time spending. It would actually be worse than that, or more than that, if you were to factor in the sort of one-time nature. This is the fourth year, the year we happen to be spending money we don't normally in the other 3. So within that, we were confined. This is our best advice we can give to you.
And just on the reduced POA court by 4 days, if we're reducing 4 days, aren't we reducing our ability to make money? No.
It is true there will be, well, it's really revenue delayed or deferred as opposed to revenue that's lost. You have roughly 9 months to get matters to trial pursuant to the current case law. We get matters to trial in roughly 4 months here at Norfolk County. So by delaying 4 court days, some charges might float up to 5 or 6 months. I don't have exact data on that, but would be somewhat more than 4, but still within a reasonable period of time. So you can forego an expense in the immediate future without necessarily foregoing, not that we assume that anyone's guilty, but to the extent that some people are found such, the revenue would accrue nevertheless.
Thanks. And just to Lee, you know, I think it was just last week I was asking her to do more snow plowing and snow removal in our downtowns. And by the way, it was appreciated what work you were able to accomplish. Businesses certainly appreciated it. But now here we are. We have $144,500 to take out. Can we afford to do that? Not just in terms of how business conducts themselves, but safety and liability. And a question through you to Lee. I don't know if you were forthcoming in offering this 144, or is it something that you're able to do easily and without reducing our service and increasing our liability and phone calls to the complaint department?
Through the chairman to council, before I hand it over to the treasurer to add the money part of it, I will speak to the snow clearing and the sort of things that you just indicated. As you recall, last week when we talked about it, it wasn't a money issue that was of concern for me. It was a manpower and staffing issue that the current staff that we had were physically out of hours and unable to work any more hours and comply with provincial legislation. And it was a weather thing. It wasn't really related to the money. It's sort of tying those two things together when they really weren't related to the reasonings that we were struggling last week. That was because we had such a prolonged storm that we maxed out our resources, not the availability for funding. I was certainly aware of this. Obviously, this amount, this wasn't something that the treasurer came up with without obviously discussing it with this. We are at the mercy of the weather, and we really truly don't know from year to year. And I believe that the treasurer has some additional information to add with respect to money.
Okay, and I suppose there might be, the way this is brought forward, I mean, there are some groups out there that that have called me. They've gone online, they've looked at the budgets, they've called me and were quite upset about losing their funding. They thought they were going to go ahead. The Everbrook Donnelly, the individual I spoke there, thought that it wouldn't be a huge burden because they're just getting going. So they said, and I was glad I spoke to them, that they could probably forego that money until April. So that one's not a huge big deal. But a lot of the others, like the feline control, I certainly can't support that. I mean, we've already had a deputation where they've said, you know, if you let the cats go the way they are, they multiply and multiply and multiply. So to me, that's not an option. The snow plowing is not an option. Some of the other things are safety concerns. I'm having a real problem with this. I can't support it.
Okay, Councillor Brunton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm going to go back to what happened here, and so and what bothered me is very simple. And I made the motion along with, who else? Councillor Wells, I think, supported it. I wanted to look at the $34.4 million on those line items. And we were refused the access to look at that, almost like it was hidden in there. We can't look at it. So what other alternative do we have? We asked for a $400,000 cut from staff. It's not the first time we've asked staff to go back and cut the budget. Had I been able to look at the $34,400,000, I'm sure I could have found some other items other than these in there. That's my opinion of it. $34.4 million is a lot of money. But why we couldn't look at it, I don't know. I guess it's secret. But anyways, having said that, 400,000, if I'm correct, James, is what, about 0.5%? 800,000 was 1% when we were doing the budget? So what are we going to do? If we don't pass this, tell the public your taxes are going up another 0.5%. Is that how we're going to do it? Personally, I would have liked to have looked at the $34.4 million. And for the life of me, I don't know why we can't do that. Thank you.
Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Public Works. The first three that I see up there, the snow plowing, the fuel, and the GPS units, I find it really hard to believe that your budget was that padded, that you have that much room to cut out of that. And it really bothers me when I look at the other page and it says that we're running deficits for all these years. And I just feel that, you know, if you require the money to pay for the snow removal, it's going to get done. And then we're going to be in a deficit position. So how confident are you, because I know you're the weather forecast lady, that this is actually going to fly without being in a deficit? Because I can't see it.
Through the chairman to council, I will pick off the easiest one first, the GPS units. As we had indicated probably at budget time, as council may recall, we're rolling out a program. I was hoping to have it all completed by the end of 2018. We just simply delayed some of those until implementation in 2019. So instead of doing it over a 2-year program, we're going to do it over a 3-year program. So I'm very comfortable with that number. I don't think it's going to have any kind of a detrimental effect. With respect to the fuel, I did look at that one. The fuel, we're typically pretty close with our fuel. That one's, in the overall fuel budget, with numbers that we're currently seeing, it's kind of hard to predict it, but the fuel's a little bit more steady than the snow removal. One of the things that I looked at with respect to the snow clearing, et cetera, was the prediction for the rest of this winter. And it does look like we're going to have, if you look at especially the next 2 weeks, we're not actually looking at the way the temperatures are sitting. We're hopeful that we actually aren't going to need to do a lot of those. And so we're hopeful that this is the equivalent of half of a big storm. And so I was betting on not getting one less big storm this winter. And so far with the forecast, we're on track and it is, but you know, although $145,000 looks like a lot of money on a single line item, the reality is that when we get a good big storm, we spend more than that just cleaning up from a single storm. You know, we did, I mean, a good example is from from the weekend that we had all of that snow. We spent how many days after the fact removing snow in downtown cores, in sidewalks and boulevards and all sorts of other stuff, let alone the efforts that we put out during that time period.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess for me,